you doing, Ranger? Are you trying to eat that? You know you can't. You've already tried. You can nibble the screw a little bit, but that's the most you can do. It's really just not the tastiest thing that you have available to you.
Let's make some Shire-inspired window and door frames to go with the PVC guinea pig cage frame that I got started on in the last video. We're going to do some pretty sweet 3D printed details in just a short while here and some awesome kind of industrial looking hardware to make this awesome. But let's start out with a simple material. These are just paint stirrers, just from a home improvement store. Bought a few packs of them because they're already in kind of a nice smoothed out form that's easy to work with just with hand tools. Not too much bother there. So I'm just cutting everything to size to make some frames and then painting them up. I'm just using simple acrylic paints, nothing too toxic here. Now the guinea pigs aren't going to be able to get to it, but just in case, I still don't want to use anything that's too fumey or anything like that, just in case they were to accidentally get a bite. So this should be pretty safe. I'm using a gray color that I just mixed up from some white and black and all sorts of other colors kind of just thrown in there till I got a tone that looked good to me. Once it's dry, we're going to weather this a little bit more, so I just took it outside with a couple different grits of sandpaper, sanded all those edges down, not so much to get it smooth really, but just to take off some of the paint to give it kind of a old barn weathered type look that's going to give it a little bit more of a charming style that'll be pretty good for Hobbity type stuff. This ended up taking a really long time, so I gotta say, if I'd known how long it was going to take to sand all of these individual little sticks, I probably would not have done it that way, but anyways, it came out well so far. The paint stirrers had these ruler markings on them already, and I was originally going to cover that up, but as I sanded it and whatnot, it's like, that actually looks pretty cool. It kind of is an unexpected detail that I didn't plan on, but it looks pretty nice, so I'm just gonna work with it. Now at this point, as I was outside, a massive gust of wind came by, started blowing everything away, and the rain was right on its tail. So I was just scampering to gather everything that blew away and get it all inside before that rain really hit in full force. But that was a pretty nice storm going on. Got to kind of just relax and watch the rain for a little while. Kind of jumped in the pool while it was raining. That was nice too. And I was joined by a little birdie there in the tree. So it's nice to take a little bit of a break once in a while when you're working long hours trying to finish something like that and you get all dirty and hot and sweaty out there sanding. So this was a nice little siesta in the middle of the workday. By the way, if you like making things also, there is a pretty sweet group called Make. I'll put the link below so you can check and see if that might be a community for you. It's a place where you can share what you're working on and then get inspired by what other people are working on. So I went back inside and finished up the sanding there, made a nice mess. And you can see there, those ruler markings do look quite nice, so I'm glad that I decided to keep them instead of fully covering them up. We do need to seal this though. Again, I'm using a non-toxic, just water-based sealer for this. And once again, you have to brush it on every single little piece. So it does get pretty annoying, but the finish looks quite nice once it's done. So I guess in the end it's worth it. And I'm not putting it on particularly thick. I basically just want to give it a light sealing coat. It's not going to be anywhere that it's going to get, pooed or peed on by the piggies. It's just decorative and just keep it from kind of the finish from wearing off, or if it happened to accidentally get some sort of moisture on it, it'll keep it nice and fresh that way. And we're going to just start screwing these together. And I mean, this is going to end up screwing onto the actual frame, so nothing's really permanent just yet, but this way you can get all the screw holes, get the spacing right. And I am using glue on the parts that I know I'm not going to need to take apart again, but some of the pieces I will need to take them apart later on when I need to add in the windows, so just keeping in mind what's permanent and what's temporary. But these are all permanent, so we're just going to drill and glue and screw everything together and make sure it's nice and square, or at least fairly square. When you're doing something that's Hobbit hole-ish, it kind of gives you a little bit of wiggle room as to if it's a little perfectly straight or not. I think if it's a little wonky, it gives it a little bit more charm, right? This is, again, a little bit tedious, mostly because I had to do everything 3 times because I have 3 separate cages, which is nice for when you're cleaning out the trays. You can take them one at a time, but it is a lot of door window pieces to make. I'm calling them door window pieces, but I'm not really sure what else to call them. But basically the 2 side pieces are windows, and then the center portion is going to be where the door is for each separate cage. And I'm not even bothering screwing these in all the way because I'll have to screw them into the PVC later on, so I'm just putting them in far enough to kind of hold things together. And then also the glue helps a lot with that, so I'm just going to clamp it for a little bit, let the glue dry. And while that's drying, I'm going to start cutting some Lexan. Now this is what's going to be for the windows and for the doors. This particular Lexan is thin enough that I was able to cut it with some nice scissors. Pretty much perfect for that. It's as sturdy as it needs to be, but thin enough to be convenient to work with. Each cage gets 3 pieces, 2 for each window and then 1 door piece. So 1 sheet was enough for all of this. Not too bad. So I cut everything to size, and then you just start peeling off the wrapping that's on there, and we're going to have to figure out where the screw holes need to be so that it fits on. Now the Lexan is going to be at the back to help keep the piggies from being able to get to any of the wood parts. But I do need to line up the screw holes with the screws that are already in the frame. So I just used a marker to mark through, which is, a benefit of working with something that's clear. It's easy to mark where your screw holes are. And then just drilling those holes on each corner and lining everything back up on the frame. We don't need to glue the Lexan in because it's going to stay on just fine with the screws anyways. And that way, if you need to take it apart for any reason later on, no problem there. And it just looks nice and neat being clear like that, as opposed to be all messy if it had glue on it, and you might drip. And you gotta repeat the process for both windows, for each frame. So it's quite a few times, but I will not bore you with showing you every time. We'll just do one, and now magically all 3 of them are done. Now we need to make the actual door parts, because obviously, you need a frame for the door that opens. So it's the same process, but I'm using some little scrap pieces on the corners just to hold the Lexan in place. You could use, like whole pieces, but the paint stirrers weren't quite long enough for that. So like, I'll just use the scraps. It works just fine. I think it looks fine too. It's all kind of rustic. I'm going to screw everything together here for now on these, although we're going to be modifying these later on, so I'm not gluing these parts. I need to be able to take them apart to add some detailing. It's going to be exciting. For the hinges, I'm just going to use Coroplast, just regular 4mm Coroplast, and create a living hinge. First clean up the pieces so there's nothing sharp on them, and then create a hinge part in the center and clean that up too, just because it makes it bend more easily and it just kind of looks nicer too. This little tool is pretty great for working with Coroplast. It's actually a leather working tool, but it also cuts the plastic quite nicely, and it's good for cleaning up these edges. I find it easier than the Coraclaw. That doesn't have as much versatility as this does, although it does give you a little more control. This one gives you more freedom, so I like it. Now we just need to screw these to the door, and then the other side will screw onto the frame. Just gotta make sure, obviously that it lines up pretty well so your door isn't hanging off crooked. And for some of the screws, I ended up just doing bolts because, well, of course for the door, but also for the frames. Some of them don't really need to screw into the PVC because there's plenty of connecting points. So anywhere that the screw is not needed, it's easier just to do a non-pointy nut and bolt so that there's fewer sharp edges to watch out for. I'm just lining up the Coroplast holes with the frame, pre-drilling everything obviously, because if you try to put a screw into these little fragile pine paint stirrers, they will just crack. But if it's pre-drilled, it works quite nicely, and also the hole needs to go right through that, through the Lexan that's in the way also. And then we just screw everything together, and we have a nice little hinge going on. Repeat for the other 2. There's all 3 doors attached, but these are looking pretty plain, so we are going to do some 3D printing magic now to make them look a lot more Hobbit-y. I want to make this look like a round door without having to actually make my door round because that's just not convenient. So we're going to do a detail that has a round cutout. I'm starting out just in 123D Design because I'm already familiar with that, but I want to get more familiar with Mesh Mixer. I've only used it once before. We'll get the basic shape drawn up here, but then we're going to switch over to Mesh Mixer to do a Voronoi pattern on it. I like this pattern because it is organic, which fits with the kind of Shire theme going on, but it's also just really interesting to try and experiment with, so I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to end up with when I'm just kind of playing around with the different settings in here because it is new for me. So sometimes the best way is just to start trying stuff after you watch a couple of videos and just see how it behaves. And it did take quite a bit of playing with to find a version that I was happy with after I had to learn the different tools that you can use to change how the pattern works. I'm going to put a link below to the videos that helped me so that if you want to try to do this pattern also, you can give it a go. I did trim the edges just to make it nice and neat, but those edges will be hidden under the sides of the frame. And then I'm just going to cut it in half because I can just mirror that to make the other side. And that's about how it's going to look, but it's still a little bit too big for my printer, so I'm going to have to print it in 2 pieces, unfortunately, and then just attach those together afterwards. So I need to print 2 of those for each door. And I did add in this round border there just to clean up the internal edge, give it a little bit of structure amongst all that organic madness. And I'm doing it at a low resolution because I want to have the layers show, and I think that's going to be a pretty cool effect, so we'll see how that goes. But basically just print it out and see what happens. It's kind of just the best method sometimes. It's kind of cool to watch print. I feel like I say that for everything, but these are super easy to print in Cheetah. I'm not printing it too fast because I want to make sure it comes out well, and sometimes with the flexible filaments, you know, you're not going to get quite the speed as you would with something else, but the quality is excellent. They are extremely durable. It's got this nice flex to it, but it's also sturdy. So Cheetah is my favorite filament right now. And it does need a little bit of cleaning up, but that's super easy. Just grab a knife and some scissors and just kind of get rid of any little nurblies going on there. Some of the parts are easier to clean out with a wood burner. Just put a nice flat tip on there and it makes it pretty easy to clean stuff up. And then we can use that same tip for joining them together. I'm going to attach them using this heated tool and then also some scrap filament and just use that to fill in any little gaps there where the edges didn't quite meet up. Smooth everything out and make sure that it's attached well. The tool I was using was a little bit dirty because I was using it to smooth out glue, so that's why my seam is a little bit on the one side. Came out better on the other side as the tip cleaned up, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to paint it anyway, so I'm not too concerned. This works great. I mean, once it's done, you don't even really see the joint anymore once it's painted, so no big deal. And because, you know, we're doing organic shapes here again, there's a little bit of wiggle room. I like wiggle room. I think it's time to consider how this door is going to close and stay closed. So I definitely tossed around quite a few different ideas here, but I decided I wanted to try to do a central doorknob that's actually functional. This is really just a challenge that I wanted to try. It's not because it, you know, has to be that way for a Hobbit door. Their doorknobs aren't actually functional. They're just in the center. So my first version didn't work so well. But there's, you know, some experimentation going on here. I was trying to see if with the flexible filament you could kind of make a spring type feeling where you twist it and it goes taut, kind of like, I guess more like a rubber band. Everything printed out great, but when I went to kind of see if that motion would work, there wasn't enough range of motion to properly be able to latch and unlatch the door. The latch piece that goes below with the hole for it to fit into worked pretty well, but this just wasn't quite right. So I ended up dropping that line of thought and going to a simpler latch form. I made the center piece a little bit bigger so that we have one side for the arm to make the latch function and the other side for a handle because it's going to look nice and be functional. Everything prints out awesome in Cheetah. I used Cheetah for everything in this project. It's also nice because that way you don't have to change the filament, which takes an extra, 30 seconds, whatever. That's kind of how it's going to move there, is each moving together, and hopefully that will work. So now I just need some knobs, and they're going to be kind of roundy and flat and whatever. Just like that. It's beautiful. I'm going to print the knobs in a couple of different colors because I think it might be nice for each cage to have its own color for a little variety, because they're otherwise, identical, so we can at least distinguish them by color. I had red and blue tea glaze, and then I needed a third color, so I used some yellow filament that's Invent. I haven't really used it for anything. It was okay. The tea glaze is really pretty, but I didn't have another color of tea glaze, so whatever. It works. So red, blue, and yellow. I think that's going to look pretty nice. I printed out more than I needed because I wasn't sure if I was going to use all the same color or all different colors, so I just, gave myself options. Now, I intended to have a cutout at the back to put a nut in that I wouldn't have to mess with, but it ended up not being quite deep enough for the nut to fit inside, so I had to kind of clear it out a little bit with the wood burner. And I ended up just basically enclosing the nuts in the backs of these. Yeah, why not? So for the decorative door fronts, I've started out with some gold here just to kind of get a base coat on. I don't want to completely cover up the white filament. It's a good backdrop to make sure everything stays bright and cheery, but I do want to bring out the texture that was created by the 0.2 millimeter layer height. And I'm going to do that by going back over it with a kind of a dark coppery color and then really bringing out some of the details just with black. And this is all kind of weathered, so you want to dab it off and do it in thin layers, not try to just paint things solid. And then a last little brush of gold on there to bring out some highlights that got a little muddied by the black. And then the final step is just to put some black on the very darkest areas. It really gives everything a more dimensional look when you bring out the highlights and darken the lowlights there. I'm going to move on to making that hardware look a lot more interesting than just plain white. I started out painting it gold, but it just wasn't looking right, so I decided to whip out the silver here and leave some of the gold showing through, but give it a lot more of a silver tone versus gold. I quite like the mix of metals for this. It's a little more interesting than having everything matchy-matchy. For the latch pieces, I'm also going to do the same kind of weathering type techniques, using black in the recessed areas and bringing out any highlights with a little bit more of that gold. I'm also going to kind of blacken the edges a little bit, make this look a little more like steel. Those are starting to look pretty okay, a lot better than just that plain white. It's always nice to see everything painted up. Kind of takes on a whole new character than just the straight up 3D printed piece. I'm doing a lot more weathering on these just so they kind of stand out more for variety compared to the door accent pieces that are more gold toned. And I'm also adding a little bit extra gold on top of everything towards the end here, just to make it all kind of still look like it goes together, even if you don't necessarily see the gold exactly. It's there, I promise. It's there. And then of course darken up those darks once more because they get a little bit washed out when you go back in with highlights. And we need to seal everything, so I'm just using a non-toxic sealer again here. This is just water-based, and it works great with acrylic paints over flexible filaments. I have used it many times now, and I'm always happy with the result. The combination is simple to work with because you don't have to worry about all the fumes, and it just sticks quite well. And it also stays flexible, which is important if you have pieces that you're going to be having some mobility to. These, a little bit I guess, not such a big deal here. I more just use the cheetah because I really like it and it prints cleanly and they're very durable pieces. Now for the central doorknob we do need to drill a hole through the Lexan. So just find the center point of each door, and I put this piece of wood and then a piece of foam over top so that I don't damage the door. I thought this was a really great idea. I was wrong because, well, that's why. So let's backtrack. We're going to put down a piece of wood. Yes, that's great, so you don't drill into your work table, but not this kind of foam. It's just no good. How about cardboard? That's going to be better. I'm just trying not to, put scratches in the Lexan before I even have a chance to install it on anything. It's fairly durable, but it definitely will still scratch. We're also going to need to put a hole in the side of the door because this is where the other piece of the latch is going to attach. And of course we're still drilling through not just the wood but also through the Lexan if it's under the area where a screw needs to go. And now we're really going to bling this up and bring in some color. I got this dried sheet moss from Amazon, my favorite store. Well, second favorite store. I don't know. It's a toss-up. And it starts to kind of look a lot more interesting once you put a little bit of green behind the weathered gold tones of the circle piece there. And you really have to work with it a little bit to get it arranged nicely and then still be able to put the frame back on, because obviously I had to take the frame off to be able to put the edges of everything under the frame. And we want to make sure everything is enclosed in this because we don't want the guinea pigs to be able to reach any little bits. I don't think this moss would be healthy. It might be toxic. I'm not sure. But it's fine because they're not going to be able to get to it whatsoever. Once the moss is nicely positioned, you just got to screw that frame back on and catch the edges of the 3D printed part. It got a little bit poofy there, kind of bows out towards the center, but I like it that way. I wasn't really planning on that exactly, but it worked out nicely. And then we got to reattach the hinge also. I am happy with how this is going so far, but we still need to figure out how this hardware for the door handle is going to work exactly. I kind of had, general ideas, and I got a bunch of different Chicago screws to play around with to see what fits properly and allows it to function. So there was definitely some experimentation here, but here's basically what I came up with. The Chicago screws fit inside here, and we've got one to go on top to hold the bottom one in place. Now, that screw at the back there, it's sticking out quite a bit. I didn't think to make a recess for it. I could reprint them, but I didn't really want to bother because I already spent all that time painting them. It's fine. We can make this work. I'm just going to put a little piece of this lamb skin on the back. I really like this sheepskin leather stuff. I always save all the scraps when I work with it because of things just like this where, you just need little pieces and you don't have to cut into your nice big piece. You just use the little scraps. It's quite nice. And I'm just using some contact cement for those. Just put a little dab on the back and stick it on, and that's going to work just fine. And that will keep it from scratching the Lexan. I didn't have that on there at first with my experimentation, and I scratched it just a little bit. It's okay, it'll just add to the charm. This is a well-lived-in house before it's even ever been lived in. We also need a little piece on the back of the center part because it's a little bit rough where I covered up the nut right there. And a little bit kind of bowed out. Everything ended up getting a little bit thicker than I had planned because I didn't take into account the fastenings at the back, but that's fine. We'll make it work. I've got a threaded rod here, and I need a little bit for each one. It ended up only taking one of the threaded rods because I only needed 4 inches per door, so that worked out quite nicely. Just cut it in 3. And then we're using these little connectors here that are for working with servos. This is RC Plain Supplies, but it works nicely for a industrial type connection here. At least I'm hoping it will. And it's nice to have those long posts at the base of the servo connector there because you can screw the threaded rod in further or less depending on exactly how long you need it to be. So that gives you a little bit of wiggle room for making it an exact fit later on when we're trying to make sure that these function properly. And I've also got a selection of different size screws here, just depending on how thick each part is. I just figured out what length screw I needed and went with that. So we ended up with like a black screw on one side, a silver screw on the other side, but that's fine because, this is mix and match metallics. Makes it all kind of both weathered and industrial and almost a little bit of a hint of steampunk in there, which is nice. And here's all those little handles that I printed earlier. I picked the 3 best ones, one of each color. And I gotta figure out how to connect those too. Now these were a couple of mess up ones I did. I made them really big at first. It's like, oh hey, that'll look cool. The tea glaze will be translucent. Even when I followed the Tolman settings for that, it did not come out as translucent as I pictured in my mind. In fact, it came out really bad. So I just went back to the settings I normally used and just made them smaller. And I've got a whole selection here, like I said, of different slotted screws and posts, so I'm just fiddling around and finding the ones that fit properly and allow the handle to spin and then still attach to the latch system. It did take a few different tries before I found a combination that worked, but I really like these slotted screws that I've got on top now, so I'm going to stick with those for sure. Maybe use those later on for something else. I don't know. I like them. They're kind of a black, but with some brown, almost weathering showing through, so it really is quite perfect for this. I am definitely losing my voice from too much talking after talking a lot while playing volleyball today too. Help, 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 mine. I got it. Whatever. I'm trying here to see if it works with having the handles super short, because that seemed like the easiest way to do it at this point. Then just attaching everything together. We'll give it a trial run here and see how it works. I don't expect it to work out perfectly the first time, but you know, you gotta experiment a little bit and just give it a whirl and then make adjustments from there. So we'll just pop it on to the Lexan right through that hole that we drilled earlier. Okay, it does spin pretty well, that's fine. So let's go ahead and attach the other side and see where we're at. I'm just going to use this long post here and then put a screw on the other side. I like the look for sure, but it needs to function smoothly, so I'm going to kind of play around with a little bit and see what might need to be modified. Seems a little bit stiff, so I think I'm going to need to find a slightly different version for that. Also, I don't like this short handle. It gets in the way because the centerpiece there is too tall and you don't have anywhere to put your fingers, so we are going to do some modifications on this and make it function better and look better. So the center attachment is not too bad here. I don't think I really need to change that. It seems pretty sturdy, except that the problem here is that the bar is too low. I didn't take into account how much poofier that center detail would get with the moss behind it, so I really didn't put that up high enough. So I just added a couple of washers behind it in the center part. And then I'm also extending the handle with a longer screw. I found some silver screws that are just about right. And then just added some extra posts on there, which actually looks pretty sweet. I like that detailing. And then the handles just screw on the same way. We didn't need to change anything there. Tighten it all up and let's try again. I think this is going to work this time. The handle spins nicely, so that gives you a comfortable motion as you're operating the handle. And then you can just fine-tune the length of the bar by tightening or loosening both sides, or just one side, I guess. Tightening or loosening, something to do with the end connectors on that threaded rod. On the door frame there, I just put a shorter post, but screwed it on securely to the frame, and then added that same screw on top. I like the double locking motion. I wasn't really planning on that. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess it makes sense that it would do that, but you don't necessarily think about every little thing ahead of time. Sometimes you just have to, you know, take the happy little unplanned things there and go with them when they work out well. A less happy unplanned thing here was that the other side of the latch, it was meant to slip right onto the paint stirrer and sized perfectly for that, but by the time I added the extra washers to make everything high enough to get over the center detail, this was too low, so the latch wasn't going to reach. Again, I was not going to reprint and repaint these. I'm just going to find a way that makes them work. And this looks, you know, fairly awesome. It fits with that kind of industrial look, so I just added washers in the center, bolted it onto the back, and hey, it's excellent. We've got the doors functioning here. I do still need to actually attach them to the frame, but I gotta take a pause here because this video is getting out of hand with its length, and I am completely losing my voice, so pardon my graveliness. I hope that you're enjoying this project. I've got probably 1 to 2 more episodes to get it finished up, I think, but there's going to be some awesome stuff later on. I'm going to add some lighting and another version of a staircase. This one's going to be kind of interesting there. I'll give you a little sneak preview, but it's going to be a PVC ramp system that is on the inside this time, because the last one was external. I ran into the problem of it just being too difficult to clean. Couldn't really put litter in there, but they wanted to live in there and just, you know, do their business all over the place. So I'm going to do a ramp on the inside this time. I've reoriented the cages a little bit, but that's nice with the modular system. You have that option, doing different versions, you know, changing it up if one thing doesn't work. So I'll be back soon with more progress on this. It's too dark inside, so I'm going to make some external lighting to go around the back there with that translucent coroplast. Obviously, we have to attach the frames to the PVC frame and make sure that all works okay. And then we can do the fun stuff of adding some extra Hobbit-y details. I've got lots of moss, so I'm going to make some kind of sloping hills of moss, I guess. I think it'll be awesome. It will be fun anyways. Probably gonna be really messy. This moss gets dirt everywhere. That's okay. That's why we have brooms and vacuums and stuff. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'll see you soon.
Oh, they love those. These little things, they will eat those right out of your hand because they're so tasty. Do you want another one? You gotta finish chewing that one first, I guess. There you go. Ready for it? Oh, there you go. You dropped it. You dropped the other half. It's right down here. Let's get another one. No, not my camera. There you go.